million Americans receive treatment for some form of mental disorder. Of that 2.5 million, about 290,000 persons are admitted as patients to public and private mental hospitals and psychiatric units of general hospitals. The greater part of these patients, about 97%, will spend a part or the rest of their lives in a state mental hospital. What will it be like for them? Well, in a few states, they will live in uncrowded, comfortable quarters and receive early treatment designed to return them to the community as soon as possible. In most other states, however, living conditions will be crowded, and treatment may consist of little more than drugs and existing from day to day on a locked ward. I would like you to come along as we visit a typical state mental hospital to see the men and women who operate it and the patients who live there. Eastern State Hospital is the second oldest state mental hospital in the United States, having opened its doors for the first time on May 1st, 1824. Unlike many other hospitals which are situated out in the country, Eastern State sits within the city of Lexington, Kentucky, and is straddled on two sides by well-traveled highways. The grounds are landscaped in the characteristic manner found around mental hospitals throughout the world, with many trees, shrubs, and open lawn areas. Eastern State is a typical American mental hospital in that the admission rate here has doubled in the last 5 years, while the census, that is, the number of patients actually residing in the hospital, has dropped slowly but steadily since the use of tranquilizer drugs in 1954. There are 4 buildings on the grounds containing 27 wards, which house about 1,600 patients. 400 of these 1,600 are on so-called open wards, where they are given much more freedom than mentally ill patients in the locked wards. Much new construction has been going on at this hospital recently. The state of Kentucky has doubled its support to its 4 mental hospitals over the last 6 years, and this support has reflected itself in new or remodeled buildings, and a 20% increase in hospital personnel over the last 4 years. The patients in Eastern State Hospital are similar to those in mental hospitals around the world. The severely ill and mildly ill, men, women, and children, alcoholics, tubercular mentally ill, and geriatric patients, that is, those who are elderly and mentally ill. Many mental patients who arrive at the hospital are physically deteriorated. Some of the older patients suffer from vitamin deficiencies, while others may have glandular or other difficulties. To prevent the spread of disease through the hospital, to make the stay of the patient more comfortable, and to allow concentration of the hospital personnel upon the mental illness without the added difficulty of the physical complaints, each incoming patient is given a complete physical examination. Although we might call Eastern State Hospital typical in many respects, this mixed day room sets it apart from the majority of America's mental hospitals. Here, mentally ill men and women are able to socialize during the day and feel the unique pleasure of companionship experienced only with a member of the opposite sex. The hospital reports this arrangement has worked well, and that lasting friendships have developed between these elderly patients. Another unique feature of this hospital is this one immense women's ward housing 140 patients. It is believed to be the largest mental hospital ward in the country. Here the patients have not only dormitory facilities, but their day room space as well, all in one room. It's also an open ward, meaning the patients are free to leave the ward during the day to visit the canteen, stroll around the hospital grounds, or even leave the grounds if they so desire. Since the introduction of various psychiatric drugs, which appear to be effective in many of the mentally ill, Eastern State officials have found the patients becoming more interested in their personal appearance. Because of this, attendance at the hospital's beauty parlor has increased a great deal. One of the hospital's 3 dining halls is an example of what you might see in many other state mental institutions. A large high room with long tables and benches, and patients eating in an atmosphere resembling the arrangement one might find in a prison rather than in a hospital. But this dining area also doubles as a place for recreational activities and religious services, where many patients can be brought together to one place at one time. And almost every hospital has a canteen or community store. Here the patients can buy food, shaving equipment, toilet articles, or other so-called luxury items. Patients with ground privileges may socialize with others at the canteen, perhaps sitting at a table making conversation over a milkshake or a cup of coffee. As with any other medical institution, there is behind each mental patient an organization of individuals whose function it is to see that the patient receives maximum benefit from the treatment available. The job of coordinating the activities of these various hospital departments is placed in the hands of the superintendent, or director, as he is called in some states. The superintendent is the captain of the team. Upon his shoulders rests the ultimate responsibility of the operation of the hospital. He is supported in this capacity by various members of his staff, to whom he has delegated certain medical or administrative responsibilities. To find out how a mental hospital is run, let's talk to the man most likely to know the complete story. The superintendent of Eastern State Hospital, Lexington, Kentucky, Dr. Logan Gragg. Dr. Gragg, as the superintendent of a state mental hospital, could you give us some idea as to how it's organized?
Yes, Mr. Palmer. Let's look at this organizational chart of our hospital. Superintendent here with two assistant superintendents, actually. One, a clinical director who is responsible for the clinical treatment program and the departments who deal directly with patients in a treatment manner. Then also our hospital administrator who is responsible for the administrative functions of the hospital. Under our clinical director, we have, first to mention, our chief of the medical staff, who is responsible for the function and program of our first physicians, our psychiatrists. Also, our special consultants, our laboratory and x-ray technicians, pharmacists, our dental department. These things function in a manner which is not hard to understand. The other departments in the clinical area are a chaplain who is at the hospital to serve the religious needs of our patients, a director of industrial therapy who coordinates the program of activity of a patient in the hospital. Here, a most important section under our director of nursing, because in this one department are one half of the personnel of our hospital. The largest group in the hospital is that of our psychiatric aides. These are the people who are on duty 24 hours a day on each ward, who spend more time with patients than anyone else in the hospital. Our occupational therapy department provides specialized activities of a treatment nature. We have a recreational program. Our psychology department engages in both testing and in certain therapeutic activities, such as group psychotherapy. Our registrar is concerned with patients' records and the admission and release of patients from the hospital. Social service is an extremely important section in our hospital, because our social workers work with patients and with families at the time of admission, during hospitalization, and as our patients leave the hospital. The volunteer program at the hospital is important, and our volunteer coordinator works with the various individual and groups who volunteer services and supplies to the hospital. We also have this group here, including dietary, supply, laundry, housekeeping personnel, who are our service personnel who set the stage and supply the materials and facilities with which these other people treat patients. Mr. Palmer, I think we can show a lot of these departments in action and something of how the hospital functions if we actually follow a patient who is being admitted into the hospital. Let me say first that we feel Eastern State Hospital is operated on a realistic basis. We don't feel every patient can be returned to his home because of the limitations of present treatment methods. But we do feel every mentally ill person can be helped in some way. The hospital this patient is entering, like many others in the country, attempts to give a prompt, direct treatment program to produce the maximum amount of benefit to each patient. This young man of about 35 is experiencing a psychotic depressive reaction. He has attempted suicide a number of times since the death of his wife 2 years ago. Evidently, he and his wife experienced a very close marital relationship, and her death has apparently produced a state of depression from which he has been unable to escape. Because of his age, he is brought to the Allen Building. This new building has been designed for early intensive treatment of male and female patients below the age of 60. The older or geriatric patients go through another similar admission process geared to the needs of older folks. But here, Jim, as we shall call him, is led to the first step of his admission by his father. The first person a mental patient would normally meet would be the intake worker, whose job it is to gather all available information from the parties concerned, so that later the physician may be aided in making an accurate diagnosis and to help him plan a treatment program for the patient. We're fortunate here because the father did bring Jim to the hospital and has remained with his son to give us some valuable points concerning the patient's history. Too often, patients are brought to the hospital by some county police official or by relatives who bring the patient in and leave because of a lack of interest. They feel their service is done when they transport a relative to the hospital. Actually, if they remained and provided background for the intake worker, it could possibly shorten the hospitalization by months or years. Medical person to see Jim is the admission psychiatrist. She continues the questioning and tries to gather some diagnostic clues to help guide the medical team, which will later construct a treatment program for Jim to follow. As you'll notice, the admission process at Eastern State is conducted in a private, individualized fashion so that the patient's dignity is preserved and it is not a disturbing factor to him. Meanwhile, Jim's father is taken into the psychiatric social worker. The psychiatric social worker is specially trained to obtain pertinent information about patients to aid in the treatment process. She will question the father, relatives, and friends to get as complete a case history as possible on Jim's life prior to and after the death of his wife. The psychiatric social worker is an important member of the treatment team, because it is often she who is closest to the family of the patient and is able to create a sympathetic family atmosphere which will help him to an early recovery. The information she will obtain will not only help the psychiatrist on Jim's case, but she will also act as a liaison between the family, the patient, and the doctor. Needless to say, this is a very important job. As the probing for information continues, Jim is taken through another step in the admission process, the physical examination. We don't know yet the nature of Jim's illness, so we must investigate all the factors which could possibly contribute to a state of depression. We also want to know if he is otherwise in good physical condition, so that certain treatment methods may or may not be used. For instance, if Jim is found to have a serious cardiac condition, he will not be given electric shock treatments because this type of treatment puts a strain upon the heart. This is a complete physical examination with x-rays, laboratory tests, and treatment where needed. Following the admission physical, Jim is brought to one of the 4 units of the Allen Building. Each unit contains just 25 beds so that the patients can be worked with more easily, something that is difficult to do when a ward is overcrowded. This is a closed area where patients are confined to the ward behind locked doors for their own safety, and so that they may become accustomed to the routine of the hospital ward. We don't take away Jim's personal clothing because we feel it is degrading and sometimes frightening to a patient to take away his familiar, comfortable clothing and to replace it with a drab-looking state hospital uniform of some kind.
Well, Doctor, here we have Jim in the closed portion of the Allen Building at Eastern State Hospital. What happens to him now?
Within 1 week after admission, Jim's case is reviewed in an admission department staff meeting, where a diagnosis is made and a treatment program is decided upon. Jim's medications and treatment activities will be directed by the ward psychiatrist responsible for the case. His occupational and recreational therapy will be planned in advance to give him the maximum benefit. This is what we call intensive treatment. Treatment which is directed at a specific patient in a persistent, predetermined manner.
You mean that the Allen Building personnel are trained especially for this kind of treatment procedure?
Yes, I do, Mr. Palmer. This medical team recognizes the importance of early intensive treatment, and that delaying this treatment weeks could mean additional months or years of hospitalization. The psychologist is a very important member of the treatment group. She will provide the psychiatrist with the results of the numerous tests Jim will take, tests which ask him to talk with words or pencil drawings about himself, his illness, the death of his wife, and other sensitive areas. Although not a physician, it is the psychologist with her trained observations and interpretations of test results who provides the psychiatrist, a medical man, with invaluable information. The psychologist has found indications that Jim feels guilty over the loss of his wife and thinks he is somehow responsible for her death. Jim will see the psychologist periodically for retesting, but between these times he will continue to follow the treatment program. His physician has designated that he receive certain of the newer drugs, and because he has had some experience as a carpenter, Jim is asked to spend some time during the day in the occupational therapy shop under the guidance and supervision of the occupational therapy personnel. Here, his interests and talents are stimulated so that he may possibly develop a renewed interest in life and in his work. Jim's likes and actually guide the occupational therapy personnel. If he expresses an interest in pottery, he is allowed to investigate in that direction. Sometimes these small beginnings result in renewed interest in old talents, people, and the world outside the hospital. Jim will participate in many group psychotherapy sessions like these. Here, under the guidance of a psychologist, Jim and the others openly discuss their emotions, problems, and fears. In this way, many patients can engage in this therapeutic activity of talking out their troubles, in contrast to the time-consuming individual psychotherapy sessions where just the single patient and the therapist are involved. Intensive treatment shows some results to Jim's psychiatrist, it will be indicated by the patient's increased ability to accept responsibility for himself and his actions. When this sense of responsibility is judged strong enough, he is transferred to the open section of the Allen Building, where another phase of his treatment begins.
What is meant by the open section of the Allen Building?
It's that part of the building where a patient has access to the grounds. There are no locked doors, and he is given the amount of freedom patients enjoy in most general hospitals.
Are there many such wards at Eastern State Hospital?
At the present time, we have 6 of the 27 wards open. Patients on these wards are those who have shown a growing tendency to be responsible for their actions, and for whom it was decided an open ward atmosphere would aid in their recovery. We would like to open all the wards at Eastern State Hospital, but the medical treatment situation and the physical location of the hospital itself, near heavy traffic, etc., does not lend itself to this.
Are straitjackets or other restraints used at Eastern State Hospital?
No, they're not, Mr. Palmer. The last time any form of restraint was used was about 6 or 8 years ago, even before the introduction of the tranquilizing drugs. We do use the seclusion or isolation rooms occasionally to separate an agitated patient from the others, but because of the drugs and additional clinical personnel available, that happens very infrequently when it does. And when it does, the patient usually remains there for a very short period of time.
Returning to Jim, Dr. Gregg, how might his treatment now continue?
Let us assume a few weeks have passed since Jim first began his treatment schedule. During that time, this schedule has been reviewed a number of times and perhaps revised to fit his state of mental health. He may now get a therapeutic assignment. This is a job of some kind on the hospital grounds. Since he is interested in woodworking, he would most likely be given an assignment with the hospital maintenance section. The first thing he must do, of course, is become accustomed to his new quarters. Jim will live in a room furnished in a manner resembling what might be found in a typical room outside the hospital. This portion of the Allen building is specifically designed to reacquaint the patient with home-like surroundings and keep him in touch with the community. We don't want him to fall into a dull institutional routine that could actually contribute to lengthening his stay at the hospital. When not engaged in actual therapy, Jim may leave the ward to walk about the grounds if he wishes, or visit friends or other patients. The atmosphere of the psychotherapy sessions change as well. This is a homegoing group psychotherapy session in which the social worker meets with patients soon to leave the hospital. In these informal meetings, they will help each other work out their apprehensions, discuss the attitudes of their families and friends, or the possibilities of getting a job when they are discharged. This sort of group discussion eases the shock of returning to the community. In addition, Jim may engage in the remotivation program. Here we use psychiatric aides who sit with groups of patients and informally discuss topics of general interest. There is no attempt to discuss sensitive areas of the patient's illness, but rather a casual effort is made to renew the interest of the patient in the world around him. The recreation program at Eastern State Hospital operates for two purposes: entertainment and/or therapy. The bus ride Jim signs out for is an example of therapy that is also entertainment. Here we hope Jim will socialize with others and get a refreshing view of the outside community. The hospital psychiatrists often use this bus ride for those patients who may soon be headed for discharge, so that they can slowly become reacquainted with the community. There are other recreational activities which are purely entertaining in character, where no attempt is made to gain definite therapeutic results. About 4 months have passed now. Jim is receiving drugs regularly and is responding well. It is apparent to all who have worked with him that he's ready for a job in the community. This means, as with many of the patients, he will return to his father and his home, work regular hours, but for a time will be asked to return to the hospital outpatient clinic, perhaps once every 2 weeks, so that a record of his progress may be kept. A member of the Kentucky Bureau of Rehabilitation, working in close cooperation with the hospital's industrial supervisor, has found a woodworking job for the patient which they both feel he can handle. So Jim will return to the society from which he withdrew, but he doesn't actually remain out there alone, because whenever needed, the rehabilitation and medical services of the hospital and the community stand ready to prevent his return to the hospital ward. In most cases of hospitalization, patients will be treated in somewhat the manner we just saw, but the treatment will differ according to the needs of the patient as determined by the patient's psychiatrist. The functioning of the hospital system, however, was fairly typical of most state hospitals in this country.
Dr. Daniel Blaine in a previous program discussed the impact of overcrowding upon the mentally ill patients. How are you tackling that problem at Eastern State Hospital?
I'm in agreement with Dr. Blaine when he says more trained personnel and early intensive treatment mean more patients become well. I would also add that the state mental hospitals could screen their admissions more carefully and refer those with only minor psychiatric problems, such as the aged who are in many cases not mentally ill, to community agencies who are set up to deal much more effectively with these individuals. In the past, state mental hospitals have been swamped with these people, and the resulting overcrowding cut down the hospital's ability to help them. We also need to improve and expand community treatment facilities to prevent admission to state hospitals and to help keep the discharged patient mentally healthy and out of the state hospital.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bragg. Today we have visited Eastern State Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. We hope this trip inside of a typical state mental hospital has given you a good general idea of what treatment is given and how and why a mental hospital is operated the way it is. In the next program of this series, we will explore a particular approach to the treatment of mental illness called the psychodynamic. We'll talk about and demonstrate psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, and define a lot of terms which many people find vague and confusing in almost any discussion of mental illness. We'll also see examples of some of the psychodynamic research taking place in a large municipal university. Until then, thank you and goodbye.